and welcome to the City Club of Portland Friday Forum. Today is Friday, May 11th, and I welcome you all to the state's premier civic affairs event. I'm Melody Rose. I'm the president of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike today. Those of you who join us at the Governor Hotel, those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, or those of you watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. We're very glad you're joining us today. We will hear in a moment about the growing importance about the Latino electorate, but first, some announcements. City Club's corporate and media partners are, of course, essential to the vitality and the sustainability of all of the club's many activities. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. I would also like to extend our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum spring season corporate sponsors, ESCO Corporation, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, and Schwabe Williamson & Wyatt. We are very grateful for your support, and we couldn't do this work without you. And if you would like to join our corporate sponsorship program, please do see one of our staff members at the back of the room or pop into the City Club offices. City Club's new Leaders Council turns 10 this year, and we are very proud of that, so proud that we're going to be celebrating on May 16th with a party at the Davis Street Tavern. We hope you can join us for this celebration. NLC is also hosting two of its famous tours in the month of May, one at the Hoyt Arboretum and one at the Native American Youth and Family Center. We hope you'll find information by looking at our website about all of these events, and we hope to see you there. And there's more. NLC is also pleased to announce their very successful mentorship program, which is now in its second year, very successfully, is accepting additional applications. This program pairs two City Club members based on personal or professional interests in order to build new relationships and connect civically minded mentors and mentees across areas of interest, expertise, and experience. If you are interested in participating in NLC's new mentorship program, a City Club staff member would be happy to talk with you about that too. Following today's discussion, we will be welcoming City Club members to the microphone for a question and answer session with our honored speaker. In addition, we invite all audience members, member or guest alike, to locate the index cards that are on your tables, write your questions during the forum, and hold them up when I ask. That way the staff members can collect the cards, and I will be sure to read at least one of those from the microphone, as we're sure you'll have great questions for today's speaker. And now, our program. The 2010 census revealed that Latinos comprise 16% of the nation's population, numbering more than 50 million, with significant growth in non-traditional areas such as the Pacific Northwest. In fact, the Latino population in Oregon grew by more than 60% in the past decade alone. Latinos are now an integral element of the future socioeconomic success of the nation and our region, and a permanent element of the nation's political landscape. Today, Arturo Vargas, Executive Director of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, will discuss the growth of the Latino population nationally and in the Northwest, and the growing importance of this electorate in the coming election cycle. Arturo Vargas is the Executive Director of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, a national membership organization of Latino policymakers and their supporters. Arturo also serves as Executive Director of the NALEO Educational Fund, an affiliated organization that promotes the full participation of Latinos in civic life. Their activities include U.S. citizenship outreach and assistance, civic participation and integration, voter engagement, technical assistance to elected and appointed Latino leaders, research on Latino demographic and electoral trends, and policy analysis and advocacy on access to the democratic process. Prior to joining NALEO, Arturo was Vice President for Community Education and Public Policy of the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where he supervised and directed their community education and leadership development programs. And with that, please help me in welcoming our speaker, Arturo Vargas.
Thank you, Melody. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for the very warm welcome to Portland, Oregon. I have been to Oregon before, but this has been my first visit to Portland. And I congratulate you on a truly beautiful, magnificent city. And some great weather, which I understand is not typical. And so thank you for arranging that for my visit. A couple things about Naleo, and thank you for the introduction, Melody. Thank you, City Hall, for the invitation to share some thoughts with you this afternoon about the Latino vote and where we fit into politics in 2012. Our organization is all about increasing the participation of Latinos in the American political process. And we have three major strategies. We work at a grassroots level to encourage legal permanent residents to become U.S. citizens, citizens to vote, everybody to be counted in the census. We work with our members to provide them with the tools, the information, and the resources so they can be effective school board members, city council members, county officials, all the way up to members of the U.S. Senate. Bipartisan, our members are Republicans and Democrats and independents, so multipartisan, truly nonpartisan. The agenda is to move forward the Latino community, not any political party's agenda. And then we have a research and policy agenda, and the issues on which we work are those dealing with how all of us touch our government. So how we administer elections in this country, how we conduct the census, how people naturalize and become U.S. citizens. Anything dealing with how we participate in democracy is the Naleo policy bucket. And so at the forefront this year is the role of Latinos in the 2012 elections. And as Melody mentioned, we say that Latinos have become a permanent element of the American political landscape. And as you follow the candidates for the presidency, and you follow President Obama's re-election campaign and now Governor Romney's campaign for the presidency that he has become the presumptive GOP nominee, we will increasingly hear them talk about issues important to Latino voters and issues and strategies of how to reach them. And that is exactly where we as a community want to be. We want the political leaders of both parties to fight for the Latino vote. We don't want to be taken for granted by one party, assuming that we will always vote for them, or take it for granted by another party, assuming that we're out of their reach. In fact, the data show that Latinos are a swing vote. So let me go back a few elections and show how Latinos have had an impact on the different outcomes of presidential elections. And I'll keep my remarks to the past three presidential elections and then the 2010 election, which was a watershed moment, I think, in American politics. So I believe Latinos will elect the president in November 2012. I firmly believe that. The reason why I believe it is because we've done it before. Latinos have elected this president in 2000, the president of the United States, in 2000, in 2004, and in 2008. We remember the contested election of 2000 between Gore and Bush. Bush ultimately won because he carried the state of Florida. He carried the state of Florida because he had overwhelming support of the Hispanic vote. So Hispanics were able to deliver Florida to Bush, deliver to Bush the presidency. In 2004, President Bush won re-election with up to 40% of the Hispanic vote. Karl Rove was a genius in understanding the role of Latino voters in presidential elections. His view is that national Republican candidates probably, at least for the short term, will not get a majority of the Hispanic vote. That the majority of Hispanics will vote Democrats. But if you're a Republican, that's okay, because all you need is up to 40% and you win the presidency. So Karl Rove used that strategy to ensure that George Bush would be reelected in 2004. Fast forward to 2008. There were 4 states that Barack Obama carried in November that George W. Bush had previously carried in 2004. And Barack Obama won those 4 states by a margin that was smaller than the number of Latinos who voted for him. Those states were Florida, New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada. Those 4 states helped flip the election from a Republican winning to a Democratic winning. So Latinos had an impact in electing Republicans in 2000, 2004, and a Democrat in 2008. One other thing about the 2008 election, Latinos also played a critical role in the primaries. If you remember the Republican primaries of 2008, it was a heated campaign among a number of candidates. John McCain went into the Florida primary trailing Mitt Romney nationally, and his campaign was literally running on fumes. In fact, if John McCain had lost the Florida Republican primary, he most likely would have dropped out of the race. The data showed that John McCain won Florida, the Florida Republican primary, because he carried about 2/3 of the Hispanic Republican vote. In fact, if no Hispanic had voted in the Florida Republican primary, Mitt Romney would have won, and John McCain would have dropped out of the race. Instead, John McCain wins, and he goes on to win the GOP nomination. On the Democratic side, we remember the storied competition between Senators Obama and Clinton. Senator Clinton was able to stay in the race until the very last primary of 2008. By the way, does anybody remember what was the last primary of 2008 for the Democrats? Puerto Rico. And both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were literally dancing salsa down the streets of old San Juan, asking Latinos for their vote in that Democratic primary. Well, Senator Clinton won that primary as she won California's primary, Texas's, Illinois', Florida's, New York. She was able to stay in the race until the very, very last primary because she carried out these pivotal states, carrying up to 2/3 or more of the Latino vote. Ultimately, she conceded. She dropped out. Barack Obama became the nominee. She got behind him, and we know what happened in November. That was in 2008. 2010, a watershed moment in American politics. We know what happened in terms of the influence of the Tea Party and the Republican strategy to take back the Congress and win key elections throughout the country. And in that race, Latinos demonstrated how they could be effective in two ways, as Republican candidates and as Democratic voters. In 2010, the number of Hispanics in the Congress more than doubled. There were 3 Latinos in Congress going into the 2010 November election. There are now 7, including the first Hispanic Republicans elected, or any Hispanic elected, from the state of Washington, with Jamie Herrera Butler, Raul Labrador from Idaho, Mr. Canseco and Mr. Flores from Texas, and of course, Senator Rubio from Florida. So it was a very good year to run as a Republican candidate, including Susana Martinez, who became the first Latina governor of any state of the 50 states, and she's now the Republican governor of New Mexico, and Brian Sandoval, who became the first Hispanic governor of Nevada, also a Republican. So a good year for Hispanic Republican candidates, but also a year where Latino Democratic voters showed that they could flex some muscle. Senator Michael Bennet and Senator Harry Reid owe their re-elections. Well, actually, Bennet owes his election because he was previously appointed, and Harry Reid owes his re-election based exclusively on the strength of the Latino vote in Colorado and Nevada, respectively. In fact, if you remember the race between Harry Reid and Sharon Angle, the polls showed that Sharon Angle was either dead tied with Harry Reid or beating him going into Election Day. Well, after Election Day, Harry Reid wins by 5 percentage points because polling doesn't do a good job in this country of really measuring Latino voters. Harry Reid got about 80% of the Hispanic vote in Nevada. That put him over the top. That got him reelected. So the Tea Party tidal wave that we saw sweeping across the country from the East Coast, in many ways stopped at the Rockies. Stopped in Colorado, Nevada, the West Coast, on the strength of Latino Democratic voters. 2010, a good year for Republican, Hispanic candidates, an opportunity for Latino Democratic voters to show that they can make a difference in statewide elections, in non-presidential elections. So now we're going into 2012, which will be an historic election in many respects, not just because it is the first it's the real presidential election. Keep in mind that this is also the first election after the 2010 census that showed that Latinos are 16% of the U.S. population. It showed that the states that had grown most in Latino population were the states that actually now have more clout in the U.S. Congress. We have seen the continual realignment of political power in this country from the Northeast to the South and to the West. The states that picked up seats after the reapportionment of Congress, Florida picked up 2 states, Texas picked up 4 states, Washington picked up 4 seats, Washington picked up a new seat, Nevada picked up a new seat, Arizona. What do all these states have in common? The increase of their Hispanic population. Latinos being responsible for bringing more political power to the South and to the West because of the growth of their population. So after November 2012, regardless of what happens with the presidential election, we will see yet another increase of the number of Latinos who are serving in the United States House of Representatives because of the new opportunities now that exist for Latino voters to elect candidates of their choice in these new districts that have been drawn in Florida, Texas, Nevada, opportunities even in Arizona, and new opportunities even in California, where California, for the first time after joining the Union, did not pick up a congressional seat after reapportionment. In fact, we were only 30,000 people away from losing a congressional seat for the first time in history. We now have 3 new districts where Latinos can elect candidates of choice. So look for many, many more Latinos and Latinas in the U.S. Congress after November 2012. Part of that will be because of the number of Latinos we project to vote in November 2012. In 2008, 9.7 million Latinos voted. That was an historic number. It was the largest number of Latinos ever to participate in an election. We project that 4 years later, we will see a 26% increase in the number of Latino voters, and that 12.2 million Latinos will vote in November 2012. Looking at how that breaks out by some states, the states that will have the greatest increase of Latino voters will be California and Florida, each increasing their vote by about 33%. Part of the reason is that those states' Hispanic populations are rapidly maturing. You know, one of the untold stories of the census is how young the Latino population is. And one of those facts that I think has been lost upon all the census numbers that were divulged after the census data were released was what's happening in states like Texas and California. In California, 51% of the entire population under 18 is Latino. In Texas, the entire population under 18, 48% of it is Latino. It's 2/3 Latino of the state of New Mexico. Now, here in Oregon, the Latino population is about 12%. So if you look at the youthfulness of the population, chances are that about 20% of this state's population under 18 is Latino. And what do Latino children do? They get older. We hope, right? Especially after the teenage years. They get older and they reach voting age. Every single month, 50,000 Latinos in this country turn 18 years of age. Every single month, 50,000 Latinos enter the electorate. So when we look at this increase of 9.7 million voters from 2008 to 2012, much of it is based on the fact that our community, our population, is maturing and entering the electorate by virtue of that, in addition to the number of Latinos who are naturalizing and becoming U.S. citizens. One of the things that we also recognize at NALEO is that 12.2 million Latinos, again, an historic number. It will be pivotal about which states we will be decisive in, as we showed that we could be decisive in statewide elections, in presidential elections, as we were in Florida, Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado. And we can be decisive in off-year elections, as we were in Colorado, and again in Colorado, in Nevada, and Colorado, and again in Nevada. But one of the things that we recognize at NALEO is that we need to do much, much more to bring in the Latino electorate into the national conversation of voting. Because come November 2012, there will be up to 23 million Latinos eligible to vote. We project 12.2 million will vote. So by default, we also project 11 million Latinos eligible to vote won't vote. And we have to do a great deal of work in this country to reach those people who believe that politics, that voting, that participation doesn't work anymore. One of the things that we're doing at NALEO is trying to understand why there are so many folks in our community who are not registered to vote and don't vote. We want to understand the barriers. We want to understand the attitudes of what is happening. Because even here in the state of Oregon, of the 450,000 Latinos who were counted in the 2010 census, 145,000 of them being U.S. citizen adults, only 103 were registered in 2010. According to Mr. King, that's gone up to 126 in 2012. But that still represents a significant gap. So what are the barriers to political participation in this country? We've taken it upon ourselves to try to really get into the heads of folks who are persistent non-voters to understand why some people aren't voting. And we've been holding focus groups throughout the country of Latino U.S. citizens, adults, English-speaking, born in this country, to try to understand why folks aren't voting. And let me share with you what we learned from the focus groups in Houston, Texas. Texas being the home to about 22% of all the Latino voters in the country. In fact, between Texas and California alone, that's half of the Latino electorate in this country. So we held focus groups in Houston, and we asked these Latino adult U.S. citizens, English-speaking, U.S.-born, what they thought about the direction of the country and what they thought about what was happening in their lives today. And they knew exactly what was going on in terms of politics. They knew Barack Obama was running for re-election. They could name the Republicans who were running for president at the time. These focus groups were in December, and there were still about 6 Republicans in the field at the time. They had an opinion about the direction of the economy, the direction of the country overall. They had an opinion about the health care reform legislation. They had an opinion about the state of public education, public safety. They even had opinions about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the moderator continued and teased out their opinions about what was happening in their lives. And many of them were most concerned. The number one issue on their minds were the economy and jobs, or the lack thereof, and the rate of foreclosures that they were experiencing, and how hard hit Latinos have been by the Great Recession. So then the moderator teased them out a little bit more and said, so given all this about the public discourse of these issues, how you feel about these issues, how you feel about the economy, how you feel about health care reform, and immigration was mentioned too, by the way. But remember, we're talking to U.S.-born, English-speaking Latino adult citizens, not immigrants or children of immigrants. And I'll get to the immigration debate in a second. When she teased all that out and she asked, how many of you then are going to vote come November? And not a single hand went up. And she teased it out some more and some more. And the conversation got to the point where people said that voting has no effect on their lives. That candidates come and go, make promises, and don't deliver. I don't think this is something unique to Latinos. I think it is a sentiment that we're experiencing at a higher index than non-Latinos. But I think this is something that is pervasive in American society. That we have a sense that politics doesn't work anymore for us, and voting doesn't work. I think all of us collectively have work to do about how do we bring back the entire body politic of this country into the process. So there have to be changes to the process. We're tackling it from the Latino community perspective because we recognize and understand 12.2 million voters come November 2012 is fantastic and great and will elect the next president of the United States, but it still is not enough. So what are we doing to overcome barriers to participation? So at NALEO, we are working with national Latino organizations. We have formed something called the National Latino Civic Engagement Table, and we are coordinating with organizations throughout the country, state and local based, to do an unprecedented voter registration campaign and voter turnout campaign, and try to connect people to the issues that affect their lives. Let me speak briefly about immigration reform. Immigration always ends up being the issue that outsizes the conversation when it comes to Latino politics. If you ask Mitt Romney and Barack Obama today to talk about issues important to Latinos, chances are they'll talk about the DREAM Act, and they'll talk about immigration. Well, the fact is that the DREAM Act and immigration are extremely important to the Latino population overall. And we care very much about the most vulnerable segment of our community. But when you talk to potential voters, these are people who were born here. These are people whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents came here. So the DREAM Act and immigration reform is not going to affect them individually or personally. They probably know somebody that is undocumented or is an immigrant, but they themselves are not going to vote because immigration reform is going to change their personal lives, which is why we need the candidates to address issues like the economy, like education, like healthcare. But nonetheless, the way that candidates talk about immigration and immigrants does have an effect on Latino voters. Because the more that the more that candidates scapegoat immigrants, demonize immigrants, blame immigrants for whether it's the Great Recession or wildfires along the border, the more likely that voters are going to think that that candidate is not an ally to the Latino community. And we've seen that time and time again, that if you try to move to the far right on immigration reform, and then in a primary, and then in the general, to move back to the center, it's going to be very hard to convince Latino voters that you are on their side and on the side of their community. But we will try to do everything we can to ensure that everybody has the information needed to register to vote on Election Day. We also will have a robust voter protection program because we want to make sure that everybody has free and unfettered access to the franchise. And the fact that today in this country, there is a movement to make it more difficult for people to vote, to require you to prove you're a citizen to register to vote, to require you to prove who you are to vote. Do you know that in the state of Texas, if you turn 18 and you don't drive, you don't have a driver's license, and if you're lucky enough to go to the University of Texas, you have a student ID. That's your ID. In the state of Texas today, that is not valid to register to vote or to vote. We are making it more difficult in this country for people to vote at a time when people have lost faith in the system, and we're doing everything we can to bring them into the system. So we have not just work to do to convince people to believe that they need to regain the faith of the system, we need to also work against efforts that really don't want to see all these people voting to begin with. But ultimately, I'm an optimist. And I believe that, this country will find its way. Latinos have an important role in leading the way for this country. I believe that Latinos are going to be and continue to be following in the footsteps of many other immigrant populations and populations of a diverse society, where if we invest in this community, develop the full talents of Latinos and Latinas, that states like Oregon, that are having 12% of their population be Latino, 20% of their youth be Latino, can continue to prosper. If we invest in our children, if we invest in their talents, we ensure that people have access to education and they're able to participate and regain faith in our system. We all have a stake in it. As folks have said before in other venues, we may not have all come over on the same boat. We may not have all crossed the same ocean or crossed the same river. In fact, we may not have crossed the border at all. A border may have crossed us. But the fact is, we're all in the same boat now. And we all got to work together and to make this country work. And Latinos are going to be a crucial element of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Arturo, for those very important and informative remarks. If you've written a question on an index card, I hope that now you'll hold it up high so that the staff can collect it from you and bring it to me so that we can include it in our discussion with our speaker. The first question for our speaker, as always, comes from our Friday Forum host, who today is Promise King. Promise is the executive director of the Oregon League of Minority Voters and also wrote on race and politics as a columnist for the Portland Tribune. He has been a City Club member since 2008. Promise?
As someone who walked around these issues, I want to also welcome you to Portland again. Thank you for a great work that you do. I have several questions, but I'm going to narrow it to 10. First, what impact do you think the Dream Act, that the original Dream Act, has on Latino voters? Second, what is the biggest impediment, or what role is poverty and access to economic justice play in depressing Latino voters? So I'll limit it to those two questions, but if you want more, I can give you later.
Okay, thank you for those questions. Talk about the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act, depending on what version of the DREAM Act we're talking about, can affect anywhere from 500,000 to 1.5 million young people in this country. There are different versions. There's a version that has failed in the Congress today that's been proposed by Democrats. Senator Marco Rubio is preparing to introduce a new version that he believes that could possibly get some Republican support and get it passed. It will be different. I don't know exactly all the details of it. We're eager to find out. But at the core, I think what people think about and what Latino voters think about Promise is that it's a sense of fairness to children who are here in this country, who did not decide to come to this country. They were brought here by this country, to this country by their parents when they were young children, and this is the only country they know. And a sense of fairness that we have invested in these kids already in our public education system. Many of them valedictorians who, upon high school graduation, find they have no options. And, you know, what a tragedy that we're not investing in among the most talented of our young people simply because they don't have the right papers through no fault of their own. I think Latino voters are very empathetic to the plight of DREAM Act students. And I think passage of the DREAM Act will go a long way of getting Latino support. You know, Ronald Reagan is a hero to many Latino citizens who vote year in and year out because they became U.S. citizens through the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. That was what was called the amnesty immigration law that Ronald Reagan signed into law. And many Latinos who became citizens did so and then registered as Republicans did so because Ronald Reagan gave them that opportunity. And they are tried and true Republicans today because of that. And I think leaders of political parties should think back a little bit from the rhetoric and look at practicality about this future electorate. Because if any political party wants to be the party of the future and the party of the majority, they will necessarily need to have Latinos as part of their political party. And as far as poverty and economic justice and its effect on depressing Latino voters, well, we know that the profile of the American voter is somebody who is more well-off, more highly educated, more likely to be a homeowner than not. And unfortunately, indices of poverty are more pervasive among Latinos, so that does have an effect on depressing the Latino vote. However, the area where it doesn't have that role is among naturalized citizens. About 25% of the Latino electorate is foreign-born. It's people who have become U.S. citizens. And your foreign-born Latino population is less likely to be wealthy and highly educated than your typical voter. So those voters are different than your typical Latino voter. So there's an interesting dynamic that plays through there.
Very good. We'll now take questions from the floor. As always, asking a question at the microphone is a privilege of City Club membership. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a club member and keep your question to under 30 seconds, or you'll see the famous City Club question mark. Also, I'll read at least one of our audience index card questions.
Yes, I'm Sharon Robbins, City Club member. So you talked about what a dramatic increase we're going to see in younger Latino and Latina voters going forward. What kind of generational differences are there in what their concerns are, the kinds of things that may motivate them to vote?
Well, point of clarification. I am hoping we're going to see an increase of Latino voters. What we are seeing is an increase of Latino young people eligible to vote. And I think that's an important distinction. Again, 50,000 Latinos turn 18 years of age every month and enter the electorate. Doesn't necessarily mean they're registering and voting. So part of the effort that we at NALEO and through our work with our sister organizations, groups like Voto Latino and the National Council of La Raza, Mi Familia Vota, are doing is trying to have a strategy to reach Latino voters. But I think one of the things that we need to start doing with all voters is I think we have to be honest with them. And one of the things that's a little perverse about our election system is that campaigns are always only about the next election. And that we tell voters, if you vote in this election, your life is going to change. If you vote for this candidate, your life is going to change. This is the most important election of your life, of our history. This is the election in which to vote. So we tell people that. And so they vote. And guess what? 4 years later, their lives really haven't changed that much because change doesn't happen overnight. And I think something we need to start developing an understanding among our young people is that voting isn't something you do just once and then your life is going to change and everything is going to be wonderful. No, voting and participation is something you need to do year in and year out. In fact, it's not something you do every 4 years. It's not even something you do every 2 years. It's something you do every year. Because we hold elections in this country every year. Once we get through this presidential election, there will be municipal elections. And there'll be people running for school boards. And so when we talk to young people about how do we convince you to participate, I think we need to be honest that this isn't about one candidate or one election. This is about having a voice year in and year out. And I think that's an important distinction we need to start making.
I'm going to take one from the tables. How do Latino voters feel about environmental issues that have been such priority here in Oregon?
Well, one of the things about Latinos that I think it's a well-kept secret, except for people like the Sierra Club and the Nature Conservancy, is that Latinos are among the most ardent green voters of any electorate in the country. California has quite the fame for having lots of propositions on the ballot. Every single ballot initiative in California that has had an environmental angle to it that has passed because of overwhelming Latino support. And Latinos not just look at issues of, well, let's make sure we preserve the wetlands or preserve the forests. They're concerned about things about like toxic waste, contaminated water, Superfund areas. They're very concerned about the fact that many of their children are exposed to industrial areas because that's where many of them, because of their income levels, are forced to live and are affected by contamination in their communities. So issues that affect clean water, clean air, and preserving the environment, preserving Mother Earth resonate with Latino voters. And strategists for the green community understand that.
Thank you. Back to the microphone.
Hi there. Henry Kramer, City Club member. I'm with the Oregon Bus Project, which engages young people and new people in democracy. And over the last couple of years, we've been working really intentionally with CAUSA, Oregon Statewide Immigrant Rights Coalition, to do voter registration and voter engagement in the Latino community. And we've been... Am I talking too fast for you? Yeah, you are. I'll slow down a little. The 30 seconds makes me nervous. And we found that even really large-scale organizing work can produce, can find several thousand folks to register to vote in the Latino community, and that's a lot of resources going toward it. And we're finding that if you got 40, 50, 60,000 unregistered folks who are eligible in the Latino community, there have to be other ways of going out and finding and enfranchising those folks. And we've started looking to, the National Voter Registration Act, Public Assistance Agency voter registration, and I'm wondering what you think the role of legal change and governmental action in franchising folks, particularly in the Latino community, is.
Absolutely. I think we need to try to make registering to vote as simple and easy as possible. The National Voter Registration Act introduced a national voter registration form. So one of the things that we're doing, and this is another way we want to reach young people, is to let people know they can register to vote online using the National Voter Registration Form. People can come to our website at naleo, NALEO.org, NALEO.org, or at YAESHORA, which means it's time. That's YAESHORA.info. And you can download a voter registration form, fill it out, mail it in, and get registered to vote regardless of what city or community in which you live. We also want to start exploring things like same-day voter registration. We want to see how we can get as many people registered to vote the day of the election, so that you don't have to think about voting 15, 30, 65 days in advance of the election. We also have to do a much better job of education. Voter education. We run a national hotline where we take calls from people who want to find out how to register to vote, and we also do phone banking to registered voters. And one of the things when reaching Latino or Spanish surname registered voters is that oftentimes folks don't even realize that they already are registered to vote. And some people think they need to re-register for every single election, or they forget that they have to re-register every time they move, or they change their name if they get married. And there are all these obstacles, really, that can be easily surmounted if we had just smarter voter registration laws.
Thank you. Hi, Carol Witherill, City Club member. What issues that affect Latinos in our country, including recent immigrants, do non-Latino voters need to know more about to be well-informed citizens as we vote for our presidential and congressional candidates and policies?
I just received an email this morning from an organization that's focused on education, and they just did a new poll of Latino voters, and their headline was, "Education is the second most important issue for Latino voters," and I'm sure they wanted it to be the #1 priority. The #1 priority was economy and jobs. And those are the issues that right now is at top of mind for Latinos. It's the economy, the impact of the Great Recession, the impact of foreclosures on Latino families, and the high unemployment rates that Latinos have suffered throughout the country. And what Latinos are going to be looking at and trying to hear from, not just presidential candidates, but congressional candidates, is how are we going to help improve the economic outlook for these communities, because people truly are hurting. And beyond that, then education is one of the top priorities for Latinos. And one of the reasons why Latinos care so much about education is because a larger share of our community are young people and children. And so anything that affects children and families are going to be disproportionately more important to Latino voters than non-Latinos. We like to say that Latinos care about the very same issues that all Americans care about, but they look at the issues through a different prism, and that prism is through the lens of children and families.
Another question from our tables. How do you think Latino voters will respond to the president's very recent decision to explicitly support same-sex marriage?
So this is an issue I think that's going to be extremely interesting as it develops over the next few months. Many people assume that Latinos are social conservatives, there's a higher indices of homophobia, and a higher likelihood to oppose gay marriage and oppose gay rights. Many people point to Proposition 8 in California, which won statewide there, in part with support from African American voters and support from Latino voters. But if you start peeling back the issue with Latinos, you learn some very interesting things. First of all, in California, there was no campaign directed towards Latino voters by the No and 8 campaign. The LGBT-led campaign to defeat Prop 8 had no Latino strategy. And only 52% of Latinos voted for Proposition 8. That's with no campaign. Second, the polling that I've seen of Latinos on LGBT issues is that fundamentally, if you talk to Latino voters about gays and lesbians as being their family members, then opposition to gay marriage and opposition to gay rights plummets. Because everybody knows in their family there's an uncle, there's an aunt, there's a brother, there's a sister, there's a son, there's a daughter that's gay or lesbian. And if you talk to Latinos about these are your family members, that touches a different element of the Latino perspective. So I think both candidates need to be very smart about how they talk about this issue to Latinos. Now, rest assured that there are some Latinos and others who will never support gay marriage. And I think the evangelical movement is one of those that is going to try to use this as a mobilizing issue among Latino voters. But again, fundamentally, Latinos are not a single-issue constituency either. I don't think that Latinos will vote for or against a candidate specifically only on gay marriage or only on immigration. The top issue of priority for them is the economy and jobs. I think people are going to care more about, am I going to get a job, as opposed to who's getting married.
Thank you. Back to the microphone.
Thank you. I'm Mariella Custer, City Club member. Once a month, I have the opportunity, the privilege actually, of helping at a naturalization ceremony. Frequently, there are non-speaking, generally elder, male primarily, and of course, we have voter registration cards in Spanish. My question is, what initiatives are there to help these older, non-speaking English, non-English speaking new citizens to understand the issues and to get them to actually use that voter registration card by voting? Thank you.
Well, and thank you for your work in helping in naturalization efforts. One of the things about naturalized citizens, and we survey the people that we directly assist to become U.S. citizens as to what their motivations are to naturalize. And more often than not, the number one reason they give for why they want to become a citizen is because they want to vote. And I think we really need to bank on that or cultivate that. And let me give you a very personal example of how that is true. In my family, my parents, my dad was born in El Paso but raised in Mexico. My mother was born in Mexico. They married in 1952, moved from Chihuahua, Mexico to El Paso, Texas, moved to Los Angeles in 1964. In 1994, my mother attended one of my organization's naturalization assistance workshops before I even worked there, on her own, to apply to become a United States citizen. And I thought, wow. And then her naturalization ceremony came up, and have you ever been to you've been to a naturalization? If you have ever been to a naturalization ceremony, it is one of the most inspiring things to witness. Here you have men and women from all over the world who are taking the oath to defend the Constitution of this country, its flag, and this nation. After the swearing-in ceremony, which you can imagine what a moving moment it was to see my, at that time, 65-year-old mother swear her allegiance to this country. And I asked her, this was 1994, mind you, California. I asked her, Mom, this was all in Spanish, what finally convinced you to become a U.S. citizen after all these years? And she said, I want to vote against Pete Wilson. The fact is that many Latino legal permanent residents have been motivated to become U.S. citizens because of the anti-immigrant rhetoric that they have been fed up with. And the one thing I'll tell you about my mother, she voted in that next election. In fact, 2 years later, she voted to legalize medical marijuana. She has not missed a single election since. And many naturalized voters are your super voters in this country. And they, naturalized citizens, have changed the electorate statewide in California. which is why, California today say it's a blue state. Well, look at why it is a blue state and who composes the voters in that state today. So watch out, Arizona, because of what you did with SB 1070. I think we'll see a similar trend in Arizona as a result.
When do you think we could see the first Latino president? And is there anyone in the pipeline that's on your radar?
Nothing surprises me anymore. At this point, if there isn't a Latino or Latina president in my lifetime, I think there will be one in my lifetime. And I'm very excited about that. And it's an exciting time to be in American politics. It can be very depressing, but it's also a very dynamic, exciting time.
I'm going to use my privilege of City Club president and push back and ask you to name names. Who's in the pipeline?
All right. So the one person that's being touted as a likely Republican vice presidential candidate is Marco Rubio from Florida. I don't know what the chances really are that he will be named to be Mitt Romney's running mate, but I will tell you he is an extremely talented man, extremely eloquent if you haven't heard him speak. I think he is somebody that has some real gifts, and if he's not on the ticket in 2012, I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the ticket in some fashion in 2016 or 2020. Susana Martinez, governor of New Mexico, I think is somebody else with executive experience that could rise to that occasion. On the Democratic side, Secretary of the Interior Ken Salazar has demonstrated that he can win crossover votes. He was elected Attorney General of Colorado and then to the United States Senate from Colorado. He's a moderate Democrat, but also somebody who I think who has a real vision and ability to touch with voters of all backgrounds. I think he could be a very dynamic presidential candidate as well.
Thank you. Back to the microphone.
Mr. Vargas, everything you said about voter apathy and people needing to appreciate that active citizenship and voter participation is a lifestyle kind of thing, all of that applies across the board, all populations. It's not specific to the Latino population. So could you explain why it's important to have an organization that focuses on Latinos and cultivating participation, and another one for other populations, rather than energy like yours and how articulate you are being addressed to everybody across the board that doesn't get those ideas yet?
Well, if the level of non-participation were equal across the different groups, then I think efforts directed towards specific groups would not be necessary. But in fact, the level of participation is not equal among the different groups. For non-Hispanic whites, the percentage of eligible U.S. citizens who vote is about 70% in an election. For Latinos, it's about 50% in an election. So you have that, disparity in performance. So obviously, what is being done to address and campaign among the entire U.S. population is not reaching these populations equally. So there need to be different strategies to reach different segments of the electorate. And I think candidates and campaigns also understand this, which is why we're seeing so much develop now in terms of micro-targeting and really candidates trying to speak almost with a personal message for each individual voter. And I think there are specific strategies and messages for Latinos that will resonate with them, that will resonate more with them, that won't necessarily be have the same kind of resonance with African American or Asian or white voters.
Very good, thank you. Latinos are not a monolithic voting bloc, given that they come from or trace back their heritage to many different nations. What is the danger of lumping all Latinos into a single bloc, and does such thinking, in fact, marginalize Latinos?
Right. So, yes, of course, Latinos are not a monolithic population. We have diversity in all respects, generational in terms of age, in terms of immigration history. There are Latinos in this country who have absolutely no connection with any country south of the border because their families trace their presence here back 10, 15 generations. There are people who got here yesterday. There are people who speak only English, there are people who speak only Spanish, and there are people who are very conservative or very liberal. All that is very true. But as I have learned through my position at NALE over the past 18 years in my career working in this sector for the past 27 years, is that Latinos do share a common set of values and interests. And, you know, last night I was hosted by folks at Portland State University with a number of Latino community leaders here from Portland. And we were talking about the issues that affect Portland's Latinos. And to me, I was hearing many of the same challenges and struggles and interests that I hear from Latinos in North Carolina, that I hear from Latinos in Chicago, in Florida, in Boston, in New York, in Fresno, in Tucson, that there are some core elements and values that Latinos do share that I think bonds us together. So we are incredibly diverse. We're not all going to vote the same way, but we all care very much about many of the same issues and the same values.
Thank you. I'll take one more question from the tables. Perhaps you could outline for us a registration and voter ID process that would both prevent fraud while not creating unnecessary barriers to access.
So in terms of voter registration, already, you know, the forms require you to swear under penalty of law that you are the person being registered to vote and that you are a U.S. citizen. I think that at the time of people registering to vote, they need to understand what they're signing and what they're doing. I think we need to be very careful with people who do voter registration for a bounty. In other words, people who are paid to register people to vote, because many non-citizens have been registered to vote simply because people would just want to meet their quota, and people have unknowingly filled out a voter registration form when they're not citizens, and that actually can really harm them when, for example, if someday they are reaching the point of wanting to become a U.S. citizen, one of the things you have to do on the naturalization form is answer the question, have you ever registered to vote? Well, if the answer is yes, you know, that can not just prevent you from being a U.S. citizen, that could subject you to some penalties of law. So I think we need to be very careful about voter education and public education, that people understand how to register to vote. In terms of people proving their identity, I think we need to recognize that there are many people who do not carry conventional forms of identification. This is very true, as I mentioned, with young people who don't drive, who then are not going to have driver's licenses. Some of them who are able to go to college will have a college ID, but again, in the state of Texas, if you are a Longhorn, right, and you have a student ID, that's not good enough to register to vote in the state of Texas. But a license to carry a firearm is. So I think we need to be as comprehensive about the ways that people can demonstrate who they are to register to vote. I think having that comprehensive options would be important if we are able to move to same-day voter registration. I know Oregon has been at the forefront of also mail-in ballots and having elections by mail, and that there's evidence that that has actually helped increase Latino voter turnout in elections. We're a little concerned about all mail-in elections without the option of people going to polls, because Latinos are among the most mobile populations. And if you are just registered as one address, Latinos move, especially if they're renters. And that's especially true in large metropolitan areas. So I think we need to be very concerned about unintended consequences to some of the reforms that are out there designed to actually increase voter turnout and voter participation.
Thank you very much. It's unfortunate that we've run out of time for further conversation today, so we'll have to stop. I hope all of you will join us next week for a talk about generational leadership and the changing world of philanthropy. As we close for today, I'd like to thank both Portland State University for bringing our speaker here today for us, and to you, Mr. Vargas, for traveling and sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much. We are adjourned.